All right, welcome to the Conversations That Matter podcast. My name is John Harris, and I am pleased to be joined today with Stephen Wolfe. I have with me, who writes for Sovereign Nations. And actually, Stephen, I found out about your material just from Facebook. I want to say like a year, 2 years ago, something like that. Somehow we became friends. I don't know how, but I appreciated a lot of your articles. And I think you helped me understand better, especially two kingdom theology and Reformed theology as it pertains to political theory. So thank you for being on with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
So Stephen, the reason I wanted to have you on specifically, other than the fact that you're smart and I think you have a lot to share, is you wrote an article recently, and I found out about it through CrossPolitic, but it's called The Evangelical Reconcilers, How Evangelicalism Reconciles Itself with Modern Liberalism. And the title of that just kind of captured me. And I thought, what are you talking about? Evangelical reconcilers. And I thought I knew. And then I read it and I thought, this is a brilliant piece. And everyone needs to understand the argument or the points that you're bringing out here. I want to start, if I can, by reverse engineering this. I want to start with the conclusion and then work backwards. Because I think you bring out some of the implications of why this is important in the conclusion. But then let's explain, who are the reconcilers? Why is it important that we understand what they're doing and the effects that their work can have on Christianity and the political situation in our country and the Western world? So I'm going to read this. It's a little lengthy, but just hold on with me. You say the evangelical reconcilers are orchestrating a neo-Anabaptist turn, and they're merely doing what the prevailing ideology has exalted them to do. Few will notice, however, this subtle reformulation of evangelical thought, despite its opposition to classical Protestant political theology. Many will miscategorize it as just another reiteration of the old liberalization of the Christian faith. But after demonstrating their theological orthodoxy, the reconcilers will continue unabated to eliminate the evangelical threat to modern liberalism. They will continue to socialize people into the new evangelical discourse dominated by catchy phrases, lines, tropes, and mantras, and appropriate terms such as threat, witness, and political to new ends. I think you meant appropriated there.
Yeah.
Okay. They will continue to Christianize popular sentiment and delude people into thinking that harmless Christian practices can disrupt secular ones. They will reduce political activity to moral witness and to securing walls of tolerance or religious liberty for a small space of distinctively Christian norms. But despite appearances, their orthodoxy and perhaps their own consciousness, the reconcilers are agents of the liberal ideological regime, legitimated by it and for it, and we ought to identify them as such. So that's the conclusion that you reach. And I think you do a good job explaining why there's this group of evangelicals out there who are serving a purpose, whether we see it or not, to disrupt actual Protestant Christian political engagement and kind of neutralize what's going on. And I think there's a confusion, and you nail this in your conclusion, that some of us will say, well, just that they're being liberal. And I want to put names with this because you named some names, but they're actually not necessarily being liberal because they're trying to hold on to an orthodox Christianity while neutralizing it. So I'm going to give you the floor now. Who are the evangelical reconcilers?
All right. Well, this could be a long explanation. So stop me if you need any clarification or make it simpler. But I think you have to start with the idea that we live in a time with a modern liberal ideology that is not. It's actually extremely pervasive within society. But at the same time, it doesn't enforce itself so much with sort of brutality. So if you look at old forms of enforcing a political ideology, it was often a form of physical brutality. So you don't conform, well, then the law is going to force you to conform, or it's going to be very physical in its forcing to conform. Whereas this one's modern liberal ideology operates very much on the realm. It's like psychological. It's enforced rhetorically. And you have these various social media. Social media helps enforce this as well, using, I think, a lot of weaponized terms. So, being accused of racism is one, homophobia, xenophobia. all sorts of these terms. And what happens is it becomes socially damaging, and you're forced to be on the basically the rhetorical defensive. So this is something where we're enmeshed in this environment where we are dealing with and contending with a lot of these power terms, power words, weaponized language, that then has a lot of force to it. And what's actually interesting is a lot of these terms, like the accusation of racism, is actually very vacuous in what it actually means in itself. It's one of the absurdities of our age, where you have these weaponized language that actually in themselves don't mean a whole lot, but they're extremely powerful. So I say that then to say, because evangelical Christianity is actually very antithetical to modern liberalism, not only in social norms, but also just in it's just general view of reality in the world. You're going to have some kind of split between it. You're going to have some kind of antagonism between the dominant ideology and Christianity. And so what this article is trying to show is that there's really that because of that divide between the prevailing ideology and conservative Christianity, you're going to have these different groups form. And so I identify three groups: the warriors, the capitulators, and the reconcilers. Those three groups. So this actually the outgrowth of these groups should be very natural. It should actually make sense to us that this would happen. So you have this social force that's trying to get us conform to liberalism. And what is it? They see Christianity as a threat, because historically Christianity within the West actually was a dominant force within society to to create norms and to implement legislation. And there was actually the prevailing system of belief was Christianity for a long time until fairly recently. So very reasonably, if you are a secularist person, or I call monoliberalism, then they will see you as a threat. They will see you as a threat. Why? Well, because you at one point were a dominant force within the West, and you're antithetical to modern liberalism. So what's going to happen from this is that the different Christians are going to divide. You're going to have what I call the capitulators. Capitulators are people, so I would say Jonathan Merritt is one of them. He's very active on Twitter and Atlantic, I believe. They're going to just abandon orthodoxy. They're going to abandon basic, especially moral orthodoxy, so they're going to affirm homosexuality, that sort of thing. And probably certain aspects of theology, probably aspects of like atonement theology. They very much look like the old liberalizers, the sort of people who wanted to shift conservative, or you could say traditional evangelicalism or Christianity, into kind of the modern age, and that ended up throwing out a lot of essential doctrines. Especially you can see it in certain doctrines of the atonement and that sort of thing.
So this would be sojourners, probably, or
yeah, I think that would be a
okay.
good group. Yeah, I think that would be a good group to think. Yeah,
And the mainline denominations and what they become would be a good example as well.
Right. So it would be mainly, you think of like mainline denominations. That's a good example of it. And in a large part, evangelical, you think of evangelical Christianity today, conservative evangelicals, is in some sense a reaction to that old liberalization. So we as like a tribe, you and me and a lot of other people, can see ourselves as conservatives who don't want that to happen again. We do not want that orthodoxy to slip again. We want to maintain that orthodoxy within evangelicalism and don't slip into the old liberalization.
Okay? So I'm going to stop you right there.
So what that means then is we're very wary of that sort of thing, where people start moving away from orthodoxy.
Yeah. So I thought of a story from when I was in college. I remember it was a secular university, and I was for all effective purposes, the one leading the Christian group on campus. And we had all sorts of problems with our administration. I mean, from getting equal access to student funds and being able to promote our club on campus. Just a whole bunch of stuff. I had to call ADF at one point and just find out what our rights were. I remember the Gideons came and they made them like stand out in the parking lot. So it was very antagonistic. But I remember I was in a music group there, and they held, this is for their entire like music department, they held their concert in it was I believe it was an Episcopalian church. For the secular university, they went to an Episcopalian church, and the pastor, I guess, there was very involved with this, and there was this joint effort, and they had this concert called Live Earth or something. It was affiliated with that to help save the planet, and there was no problem there. No problem with separation church and state kind of issues, which we were having with our evangelical group. And so I think you just beautifully described kind of like they don't see that as a threat. They're capitulating. So it's like they believe the same things we believe. They don't really believe the Bible's true. And furthermore, on all the social issues, of course, they're pro-homosexual and all the rest. So anyway, I just figured I'd throw that out there.
The important thing to view these guys in relation to the ideology is that they are basically the open Christian arm of the ideology. They say, hey, look, we're kind of part of this. I wouldn't say they're part of the ruling class, but they're very comfortable with being around those sorts of people, and they are the Christian face of it, and they're trying to get you and us to actually be like them. So actually abandon these core tenets and actually kind of move towards. So they're actually trying to, in some sense, trying to proselytize us into the modern ideology. So that's the capitulators. I don't talk a lot about them.
Yeah.
Then I'll just say the warriors would be someone who's okay with the fact that we're a threat, want to be a threat, want to assert themselves within society, to try to change things, conform them to maybe, if not Christian norms, at least human ones, so that we could all be equal in certain sense in the public square. That we don't there's no sort of prevailing ideology that excludes us. So that they're the warriors who want to be more self-assertive and are not so much afraid of political power. Okay, that sort of thing. And there's a wide range, I think, people who could be considered warriors.
You mentioned Doug Wilson as one example in your article. I think he was the only one. Is there anyone else that you can think of that you would put in that category?
Well, yeah, I think people. One first that comes to mind would be someone like, I don't know, Hunter Baker. He's I know him through Facebook. I don't know how far he would want to associate with all this, but he would represent, I think, in part, or a lot of people. So Doug Wilson would represent kind of the more militant, not violently militant, but more like the more kind of more very self-assertive. Let's kind of Christianize.
Joseph Spurgeon, maybe, or Matt Trewhella. Would they kind of be in that vein? They're very countercultural, very.
I mean, you could see some people would be like, maybe like Jeff Durbin might be one as well. I think he'd be one as well.
Good example.
But I think another group, I think, within the warrior class would people who see the public square not necessarily as one that has to be kind of Christianized, but one where, hey, we should be able to allow to contend in politics and be agonistic just like everyone else. And there shouldn't be this like presumed negativity when we enter the public square and try to formulate things and push things and shape things. So that would be more like almost like a neutrality or common ground argument. I think those people can be warriors as well. Though I know people would disagree with that, but I think that could be the case.
Well, so that's like what you just said, because there is a certain sense of shame that I've heard this even when I was in seminary. I heard this all the time, that Christians, especially the more they align themselves with the Republican Party, they just want power, and that's all they're after. And it was almost like, I don't want, I remember having this thought, like, I don't want people to think that I'm just like after power. And so the warrior class just doesn't care about that kind of pressure coming from the greater evangelical world. They're just going to go full ahead, and they're going to do what they need to do to implement the law of God.
I think at their best, I think the warrior people are going to be the ones who recognize that we're all in some sense infected with this modern prevailing ideology. It's in our heads. We're drawn to it. You see some of the people who have kind of deconverted when they, and like Josh Harris and other guys, the way they talk about the conversion is that now they're at peace. There's a certain peace about it, which is really interesting way to talk about it. And I think that the warrior people realize that it's not only a battle in the public square, it's also one in your mind. Because in some sense, we can get drawn towards the peacefulness of just kind of melding into the collective.
Yeah, you're not so many
being one of them. And exactly. There's something peaceful about it. So I think at their best, the warriors realize that you have to resist that psychological pressure that's inside you to seek after that easy route of peace and tranquility. There is a certain cognitive tranquility with just kind of joining the masses in their sentiments. And actually just watch the deconversion narratives, and they talk a lot about this idea of becoming this happiness and peace, almost like this euphoric that they can release from that tension that they had to contend with, and just dive straight into the modern mindset, and just watch for that idea of peace. So anyway, that's why I think warriors are self-aware in that sense, and they resist. They're not resisting. It's not like a resisting truth and like, oh, maybe they're right. It's more like just that I think we all have a desire to be kind of tranquil in our mental, in our life. Not only you just we're going to be drawn towards that, but
it's like
but part of having a like I find it kind of this effeminate aspect to deconversion, in the sense that they've failed to resist. Well, I'm just saying they've failed to resist. They failed to resist the promise of tranquility from the world, and so I think that's something that everyone should make sure that they are self-aware of that. So
yeah, it reminds me of, it's like the man who divorces his wife or something, and it's like, they were fighting, they didn't get along, and then he's he makes this decision, and then he's saying, well, I'm at peace now because it's just me, and I don't have to deal with all of that strife anymore. And anytime there's friction, I think weaker men, especially men who don't want to deal with conflict and play the part of a man, they're going to retreat for the sake of peace, pursuing their own, the set of their own agenda, that's not going to be at conflict with the external realities in their life. So I think this is just so important. And I see these two groups, and it seems like there's a temptation to just see the two groups, right. With some of us at least. Like there's the good guys, there's the bad guys, right? And of course, in my mind, the good guys are the guys that want to go and exercise the Great Commission, and if there's any limitation on free speech, they're going to fight that. They're going to take the battle to the world, and the gates of hell will not prevail against Christ's church. And then I see the bad guys as, okay, these are the guys who they've just created a truce with the world, and they're basically giving up orthodoxy. But there's a group in the middle, which I want to spend the majority of this on. Okay. Explain the group in the middle to us and why this is important.
Okay, so like I said before, that we are, as evangelicals, are kind of wary of this liberalization. And so when we think people look liberal, they think, oh, the old liberals are going to liberalize us. But if you think about it, if it's true that this prevailing ideology of the modern liberalism sees us as a threat, but at the same time, we are going to be resistant to becoming all capitulators. Well, who is then going to rise up among us that's going to then nullify us as a threat to the prevailing ideology? What is the ideology that kind of almost infects all of us who's going to be elevated among us? Well, I think, just from observation, that we have something called a reconciler group class, and they are the most powerful people in evangelicalism, at least in conservative evangelicalism. They're the most powerful group because they have this sort of legitimacy as wise one. There's political sages, despite being wrong about so many things, and they get all the conferences, they get all the book, all these things, all the book contracts, articles, and you can see it. And this is in Christianity Today, Gospel Coalition, and associated groups. These guys will all be reconciled. So the idea behind a reconciler is, one, they are not capitulators because they hold to, they objectively hold to basic orthodoxy. So I think Danny Akin, I think it's how you say his Akin, when he was responding to some of the social justice accusation that he's a lefty or social justice stuff, what did he do? Well, he ran through his orthodox credentials, even substitution atonement, even penal substitution, imputation, all that stuff. He all that stuff where the old liberalizers would reject. He affirmed and said, "Hey, I'm not some sort of lefty." But what these guys are, is what they do is that they affirm they affirm the distinctives that make it so that they can remain in our camp, objective, identifiable as one of us. But at the same time, they have, I'm not saying that they have like nefarious purposes or some conspiracy, but the reason they are elevated up is because they can find legitimacy, because they propose an idea, they propose theology that nullifies Christian evangelicalism as a threat to modern liberalism. That's what a reconciler is. It's they remain in our camp because they affirm our distinctives, but then they shape the way we think, and who we affirm, and in order to then nullify us as a threat. In other words, and this comes out mainly in political theology. Well, not mainly, but one big area is political theology. It's what I call in the article a neo-Anabaptist turn, and that's this attacking political power. They say that it's we shouldn't be obsessed with political power. What they specifically mean by that is often kind of lost. There's not a whole lot of political theory among these guys, which is very frustrating for a guy like me. But really it means that we are criticized for any kind of action, the self-assertive, trying to seize or have some serious influence in politics through law. I think this also means culture as well, so that there's a consistent critique of cultural Christianity, by which they really just mean, I think, Christian culture outside of the church. I think that there's more than that. So in other words, that they want to make it so that we do not assert ourselves in society as people who bear the truth and want to then shape and norm society and politics and government and law with our Christian perspective.
So Tim Keller, is he in this group?
I would say yes, he would be in this group as well. Yeah. So he would. This is where the neo Calvinists are an interesting group, because the neo Calvinists want to engage the culture, but they're really basically they're in a large part kind of like old modern political liberals. They don't want any. They talk about transformation, but it seems like it's really their public engagement is really a matter of witness and evangelism. It's making Christianity look attractive to people outside of it, rather than actually a means of asserting and kind of securing power and Christian influence.
I know when I was at Southeastern, the terms like gospel issue and cultural engagement became really popular, like right after Trump's election. And I didn't really hear those terms before, but they became big. And a lot of the time they were applied to the arts. So, getting Christian film, and even, if you have a talent to paint, you should paint as a way to engage culture. But a lot of the time it was presented, it wasn't as, the thesis, antithesis, like show Christianity in, diametrical opposition, or offer a better way. It was more like, well, you're going to offer a better way, but you're going to do it by kind of like wooing the world in, showing them how beautiful this is. I mean, to men who are in darkness, they're just going to see. And of course, God can use things like that. But it was a different kind of, I mean, you just mentioned being a witness, and I think you mentioned Alan Noble's Disruptive Witness book. And I see a little bit of a difference with the way that they're approaching it. It's they don't want to offend the world. That seems like it's something they're really against.
Yeah, I think the way to see it is that they want that they are very comfortable and actually would desire and see as a default for Christians to be kind of the marginalized group in society. So within that marginalized community, you can then show forth, various art and do Christian movies or Christian or film. You can do all sorts of, arts activities within that. And that's, I think that's our perspective is that we're a marginalized community, and then we show forth all this creativity that we have. And in that that's fine. But what I was arguing though, is that they are comfortable with that marginalization, that they think that that's the default position, and that marginalization, despite all those other efforts to do arts and all that sort of thing, that's really not a matter of saying, hey, we have a better way, and by the way, this is the way it should be out there.
Right.
It's really just a kind of a showing forth of the gospel within their own marginalized community. Whereas, and what I'm saying is that very perspective is the Reconciles perspective. It's saying, hey, you guys should tolerate us, or they call it religious liberty. It's really there's a difference between religious liberty and toleration.
Yeah.
But we won't get into that. But they're being, tolerate us, and then we'll show forth the gospel of these arts and crafts. But we won't actually go out into the world to do something about our marginalization. We won't demand equality in the public square. We won't contend to like not harshly. How I'm saying, like very self-assertively contend in the political realm. We're not going to be a threat.
Directly.
We're not going to be we're not going to be a threat to your order, your political order. But we just want to be tolerated so that we can kind of do our own thing in our isolated, marginalized community. And that's exactly what I mean. If you look at the political theology and the way they talk about moral witness, where they talk about gospel issues, all the rhetoric and the subtle political theology, the neo-Anabaptist turn, is designed to make Christians think of themselves as, by default, and it's even preferable, that we are a marginalized, unthreatening community to the prevailing ideology of the land.
That's very interesting.
That's reconcilist. But again, they're orthodox in
right.
In strict way, in certain things.
So the interesting thing to me is, because you're helping make sense and put some pieces together that I thought I kind of understood, but you've clarified. There's this sense in which all the gospel issues are issues that do not directly oppose the prevailing ideology. Right. So the gospel issue is, welcoming refugees. That's a gospel issue. And it's like, well, I'm not against, the church should be welcoming to everyone, right? But that they make that's the flag we need to raise. And that happens to be something that won't get us in trouble with the media or academia or any of the elites in the culture. And so that's fascinating to me. And I'd like for you to just give me your opinion on this. You may not have been prepared for this. I don't know, but I'm going to pick your brain here. One of the confusing things, I think, to myself, although I've thought about this and I think I might know, but to a lot of others, is how did we go from moral majority religious right, in a sense, like your Jerry Falwells and your Pat Robertsons? Obviously, they're the two. There was others, but they're very much Roe v. Wade happens, and like we're going to now be salt and light in the political sphere. And I'm not saying they always did it right, but there was this attempt, Francis Schaeffer, to get out there and to stop moral evil outside the Christian ghetto. And now we have completely abandoned that, it seems like, at least with the institutions in evangelical Christianity. And we're saying, hey, our ghetto is the best ghetto. You should come because we've got, and then it's like a list of things that we have that are preferable to the outside world, and we're trying to, woo them in. So how do we make that switch?
I can't say I'm an expert with kind of the old religious right, but I think in part they're well, you could say in some ways that we're very similar. That our evangelicals today are kind of the same thing but look very different. I think the old religious right saw political activity as a way of filling pews. And this might just be one aspect and not the actual principal part of it, but there was a sense in which if you preach a lot of politics from the pulpit, it would get a lot of people to go to church, including men. So I think there was if you preach politics from the pulpit, a lot of men will go to church. So I think there was something, an aspect of that, of like trying to fill pews. That I don't mean to say that that's the intent of the whole movement, but I think today there is still the sense of, well, instead of doing self-assertive political activity, we're going to then have our isolated communities, make it attractive to different people, and have them come in to church. So it's kind of very similar, but how we got from there, I don't have a solid narrative.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that the people who think marginalization is the default, the reconcilers, they do think that what's hindering people from coming to faith or coming to church, and by which I think they mean like coastal elites, by the way. I think most of this theology assumes a coastal elite attractional model. But the marginalization is what it does is it lets you present. It's basically a way of making the church attractive. But you're making the church attractive by affirming, but just going just far enough in your affirmation where you're still affirming orthodoxy. So they'll say that homosexual acts, for example, are wrong, that they're immoral, they're against biblical standard, but they'll go as far as possible, many people, in affirming aspects of homosexuality or same-sex attraction or whatever, just to show that they are not the old kind of dismissers, that they're not part of the old oppressive regime, so that they're really kind of showing that, hey, the church is this place where, yeah, we don't affirm all this stuff, but at the same time we will recognize, affirm that the new elevation of celibacy is an interesting thing in evangelicals. That's really typically kind of a Roman Catholic thing, but now this sudden affirmation of the vocation of celibacy is an interesting development. And I think that, again, it's affirming, it's showing forth this attractive ecclesial community to the world to try to get them to come to church. In itself, it's not wrong, but what my analysis, well, I mean, there are probably things wrong with it, but my point, though, is really what function does this play within our society? And my argument is that really these people who have elevated to do all these things are really elevated, and because of it nullifies Christianity as a threat to the prevailing ideology. So that, again, that's my central point. That's one point of analysis to understand these people.
Yeah, and I have so many things in my head that I'd like to discuss with you, but I want to get down to the kind of the main point here, because I think you beautifully articulated these three groups. And for someone like you and I who see this, we see the Reconcilers as kind of a threat, because we know that this is, at best, this is a temporary movement, because they will either be, I mean, you can't really be in that state forever. You're going to be sucked to one side, or as the state grows and the prevailing ideology, which opposes Christianity, is set into more of a kind of like a hard national orthodoxy. Those guys aren't going to have the influence. They're not going to be a force at all for anything. And so, what do we do with that? Like, how do we view them? Because that you pin the difficulty. There's an orthodoxy that they will affirm, but yet at the same time they are they're neutralizing any threat that the prevailing anti-Christian ideology has. So, I mean, how do you navigate this in your own life?
Well, I mean, for me in particular, like I said earlier, I'd say, again, just be very self-aware that we're all infected. I mean, it's almost like a disease. My ideology works that way, especially nowadays, because we're bombarded with, from the moment we're born, we're bombarded with media, and it's stronger. The ideology is stronger now than it's ever been, because before you were isolated, you were distant. Before all this media, you just had kind of a small social circle, but now it's the control of it is tremendous.
Yeah.
So be very self-aware of the ways in which you're drawn towards, I'd say, cognitive tranquility. Be willing to do things that seem uncomfortable. Sometimes you'll say something, or say something on Facebook, or say something out loud, and you believe that what you're saying is true, but at the same time that you have that feeling of, do I really want to say that?
Yeah.
And more than that, it's almost like, it's like being you're socialized into ways of thinking and action. So I'm from California, so of course I'm all about recycling. And from kindergarten we were talking about recycling. I remember that. Or just driving down the road. Imagine you finish a burger and you throw out the package out the window. That would affect you. To me, I'd be like, wow, that was like, wow, what did I just do? There'd be a feeling of almost like self-disgust. And of course that's good. Don't throw burger wrappers out the window. But there's also aspects of thought that if you say something, you can know what I'm saying is true. And at the same time that you have a subtle, almost like self-disgust for saying it. Maybe that's too extreme way to put it, but there's a certain self there's an emotion, you say emotional, psychological reaction to your own statement, as if like you've made something public and you're like offended by your own public statement in some ways. But we have to be willing, and we want to be prudent and wise. I'm not saying
Right.
be jerks or be dumb, but we have to, but at the same time, be willing to state what is true despite your own, despite the own sort of cognitive dissonance, discomfort it'll lead you,
That is so
and
good.
work through that, because that's I think that's really important. Because and I say that because the people who are reconcilers, I mean, I'm friends with people who I'd consider reconcilers. So I actually want to clarify something about that a little later. But
Yeah.
I think the draw for them is they're intellectually convinced by Christianity, but they at the same time are deep down, I think, enmeshed in modern liberalism. That's I think psychologically they are drawn to it. And that's one reason why I think that they are the ones, and I think many of them are very intelligent. As much as I beat up on Alan Noble, I think the guy's very intelligent.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but because they have these, like I would say, monoliberal sentiments, they are the ones, because they're also gifted, are the ones that then fill the slots as these reconciler slots. But I think that they have a tension between what they intellectually affirm and what they also in sentiment feel as well. But we are all like that. I think there's a spectrum in a sense. We're all like that in a sense where we have sentiments that clash with our intellectual conclusions. And what's important is that we work to shape those sentiments around what we affirm intellectually.
Truth.
That'll be I think the important. Yeah, I think that'll be
That's really good.
going forward. But the reconcilers, I think they're going to be the ones who will turn into capitulators. I don't see many of them becoming warriors, but they'll try to maintain that middle ground. But just like in the debates on racism and stuff, they'll never satisfy the actual liberal regime. You can't satisfy it, because it's really, in the end, it's perfect conformity or bust, or you're out, or you're done.
Right.
And it seems to be approaching forms of physical brutality. So we're moving away. We're moving away from rhetoric. We're moving, or not. We're moving away, but it's moving beyond rhetoric and psychological manipulation, and that sort of thing. And it seems like there's going to be more legal aspects to that undermine Christian faith, and there's going to be not more than, and perhaps even the justification of a certain physical brutality. I'm certainly, you see some rhetoric. Antifa, of course, thinks we're all fascists, and the media doesn't, and many, like the Portland mayor, doesn't do anything to defend people who
stand down.
oppose them.
Same thing in Charlottesville. Stand down. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was really good. The verse that keeps popping up in my mind is friendship with the world is enmity against God. Mm-hmm. And I see the reconcilers, and I'm not going to I don't want to put them all in one box that they're all the same. And I know there's differences, but that's certainly, I think, an issue that they all probably would need to think through. Like, am I trying to be friends with the world here? And what you're saying is, don't think about that. Try to rid yourself of that wanting to be friends with the prevailing, where everyone else is going and what they think, and just stick to the truth of God's word and what he says. And, I know you mentioned Doug Wilson as someone who's, not a reconciler, more of a warrior. And there's been times, I've wanted to, I thought, man, Doug made a really good point in this. I'm going to post this or whatever. And then I think, I really want to post Doug Wilson, and like, yes, I do. Yes, I'm going to do that, and I do it. But like that little thought that like, well, is someone going to think, because, well, he's hated, but no, he made a good point here. That little struggle, I think really gets to the heart of what you're talking about. We all have it. It is like, it's innate, it's something that grieves our spirit in a sense. And so I appreciate that encouragement.
Yeah. I think that people become easily toxic. And this is in part from, I think, social media, particularly Twitter, where you can just be beat up by random people for, Doug Wilson could be talking about eschatology, and then all of a sudden someone brings up his old book from the 90s on race or from slavery, and you're like, but it doesn't have any direct relevance to what he said. But
That
So
happened to
yeah.
me. That happened to me, you know, and I'm going to just share this. I mean, this happened to me a few weeks ago with some guys. We were talking about something completely unrelated, and someone went back on my Facebook and found something from 10 years ago where I had watched a documentary about Jefferson Davis. It was called, I think it was called Jefferson Davis, an American President. And by the way, I do endorse it. You should go get it. It's a good documentary of understanding Jefferson Davis. It taught me a lot of things I didn't know. And actually, it made me have some respect for the guy on a personal level, like what he went through and stuff. So anyway, I had put that I really like this documentary. And I said, this guy's like a hero of mine now. Now, doesn't mean I have heroes in the North and the South. I have ancestry that goes back both directions. I honor both sides of my family and stuff. But yeah, no, I honor the Southern side as well. Well, that in this conversation, completely unrelated to that, someone pulls this thing from 10 years ago and puts it in. John's a racist. John, you know, and and then it's like, you know, mosquitoes like coming at it. It's like, you know, 15 people immediately. John's a racist. John's a racist. So
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing where it's like, you know, you can't have a rational dialogue, and the temptation would be for me just like, I'm never going to post anything that the world would think is controversial, and that's wrong too. So
yeah, but you know so what happened there though is that they're actually using, I don't know if it's a Christian or not who
they were
did
Christians.
that
Well, they claim to be, yeah.
but what they're actually doing is that they are relying upon a rhetorical weapon that is that did not arise from Christian circles, but is actually part of the,
yes,
I would say the basic rhetorical move of our society, and they're using that as almost like a wind at their back in order to go after you. So it's a certain technique they're using. You know, it's a rhetorical device. It's a certain technique, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. In part, what I'm talking about is someone like you who asserts something 10 years ago, and then what do? They think they're being, I don't know, heroic in some ways, but they're really just using this kind of silly rhetorical device from broader society to go up
yeah,
against you. And and then you can say they're even Christianizing it too, because maybe they bring up like the the image of God or something like that.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's like this: the people who want to dwell on dignity, human dignity, this and that, but they just use the word image of God
Yeah.
for all that. So it's just a Christianization of a rhetorical device. Racism is the accusation of racism is just one of those things.
It's like meaningless at this point. It's just like,
But no,
yeah,
they see you. It's in some sense it's a compliment if someone's going to go back. No one's done that to me. I don't know what they'd find, but for 10 years ago, they actually they look after your stuff 10 years ago. That means they see you as a threat.
right.
So what's a way to nullify a threat? Well, you use, if you're a reconciler, you're going to use the tools available to you by the ideology to beat you down, because
Yeah.
that's in the end what's going to nullify or going to neutralize, what's going to eliminate the threat is actually going to be the tools of the world. I say world, I want to be clear, but the tools of modern liberal ideology.
That's right.
And that's exactly what happened to you. I think that's actually a great example of what I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
which is one, probably these people, I'm guessing, affirm a lot of all sorts of orthodoxy that, you wouldn't want to call them a heretic. Maybe not, but I'm saying
Yeah.
you can see it. You can see how these guys would be orthodox in a
They
lot of
would
ways,
say,
except
yeah,
what they do as reconcilers, if they're in your camp, meeting the distinctives, but then rely upon the rhetorical tools of the ideology to then neutralize you. And that's exactly what happened. I'm not saying you've been neutralized, but that was the attempt.
right.
Does that
Yeah.
make
And
sense?
I have, and I realize, those who are, the people that are going to buy into that line of reasoning are probably not people that would be fans of me anyway, or like what I'm doing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's fine. But, I was thinking, want to make this final point, see what you think, but shame is often used to control people in many false religions. I mean, and obviously, for Reformed Christians, we're very familiar with the Reformation and kind of like how even in selling indulgences and just the way that the Catholic Church financed itself was based on shame. And I was reading this the other day. I think it's I want to say Second Timothy, where Paul talks about false teachers going in to these like widows' houses who are weighed down. It says weighed down in sins, and they take advantage of them. And there was a situation with close to us where someone it was like a church leader, and it was an adulterous situation. And it was pretty much that verse to a T. And we had talked to this individual, and the story was, well, yeah, I wasn't going to do it anymore. And there was this shame, and this church leader would keep showing up at the door. And there was like a manipulative tactic to use previous sin against this person to get them to keep sinning. So shame is just one of these things that you can use to get people to do what you want them to do. And that's what I see that's so dangerous in this reconciliation motif, is the willingness sometimes to use that shame. I'm not saying that everyone's like that, but I've seen it far too often, using the world standards to bash someone who's in the warrior kind of mentality of, come to our side, be like us, be neutralized, be effeminate, really. I don't know. What do you think about that? Is that...
I would say that shame in itself is not a bad thing. It's actually very good for society to have, formally speaking, to have shame.
About the right things.
For a long time, I actually, before these last few years, I was a big advocate of the idea of a community giving kind of nasty looks at people who are doing the wrong thing. For a long time, I said that, and I said that Christians should do it too, because it's a way of social discipline and make sure we all peace with one another. If you do something wrong, I remember telling a guy, what are you going to do if a guy, again, it's like throwing trash out. Let's say a guy drives down your street and he always throws cups out the window and makes it trash your neighborhood. Are you going to confront him, or what are you going to do? And try to get him to stop. That's part of our, I think, Christian, or just part of our being in a good world, is that you have to kind of say, stop that, look at him. Anyway, so shame itself, I don't think is wrong, but
no, I wasn't saying that. But shame according to the world standard, yeah.
Yeah, but this is my point, is that the way they shame is almost always, and I can't think of an exception, maybe there are, almost always with the wind of the world, or the wind of liberalism at their backs. You know what I mean? So one example is the Covington Kids example. You had all sorts of evangelical leaders going after those Covington Kids. The incident with him and the on the DC steps with the black nationalists and the American Indian guy, and they all just went after them too. I wrote actually a blog post on that, of Sovereign Nations, like J.D. Greer, Karen Swallow, all those people went after him. But that's just another example of how they are just take their cues of what to be outraged about, what to shame about from the world. So there is really, like, you're opposed to refugees, or you're xenophobic, you're racist, you're nativist, you're whatever, you're a nationalist, and that's all bad. It's just it's one thing to shame because you cheated on your wife or something, it's because you shame that person,
right?
Because that's an actual thing that's clearly you don't do it. But then if you're doing that, or if you're doing anything simply because by the force of the ideology. And by the way, what it does is actually does the reconciliation by which, I mean, that makes you passive. It pacifies. That's another word I meant to use in my piece, was that it pacifies you in relation to the world in terms of politics.
Right. It seems like there's two ways of dealing with different quote unquote sins. You brought up the guy who throws trash out, and I could see someone being like, no, wait, like, don't give them a nasty look, or you don't confront them. Go find out what their story is. What led them to throwing that cup out? Because that's the way. That is one way that it seems like homosexuality is like the number one thing, or any sexual sin really, that now the reconciliation evangelicals will use in that regard. They'll say, "Oh, you need to go find out like what led him to make that decision." And there's things you don't understand. It's like you have to find out all this knowledge, or gang violence, you need to know what it's like to live in their conditions. And to an extent, that's true. You should be like empathetic and understanding, but like they have that language towards that. But if you do something like, hey, I like the documentary about Jefferson Davis 10 years ago. It's like,
Yeah.
boom, like there's no like trying to understand. It's all condemn.
Right. And I'd say, I mean, one thing I think important thing about the kind of the homosexuality issue, I think there has been some good in kind of understanding people's situation. So before, people I think were very kind of dismissive and disgusted by even just the idea of same-sex attraction. So I think there's been some good in the movement towards understanding these people,
Right,
and
they're
seeing them
people.
as fellow Christians who have some sort of pattern of sin in life, just like we all do. But I think the big thing to look for, though, is not that, though there is some aspects of that to talk about. I think it's also the matter of elevating these people um, as if they are like some grand benefit to the church, as being that deserve a certain distinct class among other Christians. The rise of celibacy, for example, as a sort of higher calling. I mean, the way we talk about celibacy often sounds like it's a sort of heavenly calling, as if it's
Right.
as if there's like a two-tier Christianity. There's like the rest of us, and then there's the people who are the higher celibate ones. So I think it's also a matter of ecclesiology, how we're kind of elevating people in these important. And again, what that does, your marginalized community, you show yourself out to the world. Look who we are. Yeah, we're still orthodox, but at the
Right.
same time, look at the way we affirm all these various identities. We didn't get in identity politics, but we affirm these various identities within our church. So imagine, again, it's like we're an island, and we're a city. No, we're a city on a hill, and we're kind of, it's like it's the same sort of thing. We're a city on a hill, and if we get this right, guys, all these people are going to kind of celebrate our the way we reflect heavenly politics or whatever. And what does that mean? Well, you have front and center before the world the various identities that they hold sacred, and we're affirming them. So what are the various identities? Well, the idea of, a lot of race stuff, a lot of sexual stuff, being very multicultural, all these things is like having a separate island, presenting ourselves to the world as an attractional model. I really think it's a sort of reversed attractional model, not reverse, but it's like the same coin, on two sides. One used to be, let's do politics and all these men will show up to church. That's like the old way. People would be mad they said that. But the other
You're in trouble with both crowds at this point.
yeah. But then the other side is going to be the opposite, which is pacification.
Yeah.
But affirming all these cultural norms of coastal elites.
There's a really good example of this, I think, in the Living Out, because they have a church audit where you can make sure that your church is a safe space for homosexuals who might want to come there. And I know that Nine Marks churches, I'm not saying all of them at all, but I know some Nine Marks churches have used this. And I don't know of anything out there to like, well, like let's pick another sinful inclination, and when I say the word racist, I mean in the old sense of actually devaluing someone and ethnic pride and so forth. But let's talk about like a church audit to help make you get friendlier to racists, make them feel comfortable so they can come and worship, understand them. Like that's not out there. That is like, that's crazy talk, right? But we'll do it with something that the world, like a sin the world says, oh, that sin's okay. So it's fascinating. And it's exactly
that's an excellent point. Yeah. So if you look at the sort of people that we ought to be kind of missionally concerned about, you'll notice that the alt-right are really not on the top of the list.
They're not, no.
The so-called nationalists, they'll call people like probably you and me. I don't know your politics very much, but they probably call me like some sort of Christian nationalist. So that's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And want to distance themselves from me, but they'll also want to become buddies with people who are at Revoice and kind of pushing the extremes there as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you just, there's something about gospel issues, like the whole term gospel issue is you have these phrases. It's really just kind of this selective, it's kind of this ad hoc selection of issues just like you have this ad hoc selection of identities that you want to affirm or be missional towards, whereas the other ones you attack. But why do you attack nationalists? Why do you attack these other people? Why? Well, because they're the ones who are most hated by the modern liberals. So modern liberals hate Trump supporters. They want to beat them, as we heard a few days ago from MSNBC. We should beat them, as one guy said. And so, but who do you affirm? Well, you affirm all their sacred identities. So it just perfectly maps. I mean, if you just look at the chief concerns of reconcilist evangelicalism, the chief concerns almost perfectly match, apart from abortion, almost perfectly match modern liberalism, except that it's to the extent that they don't actually violate basic orthodoxy. You know what I mean? Again, the capitulators are the ones who just go all out into that camp.
The
reconcilers push it until they can affirm just up to the point of not abandoning orthodoxy.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, and that's really what I wanted people to understand. You know, I was looking at this video of Walter Strickland and some of the things he said about James Cone and Diotis Roberts, and you read Cone and you read Roberts, and they're like, yeah, we don't take the Bible literally. Like, yeah, like orthodoxy, like that's how they act. But then Strickland, who's more of a reconciler, he's like, well, we can take good ideas from these guys. We can chew up the meat. We can spit out the bones, and we can keep our orthodoxy while also meshing it with their liberation theology. And that is what I see out there. You know, and it seems like the guys who are the capitulators are actually more consistent. They're at least admitting like, yeah, you can't really have biblical orthodoxy and try to maintain this, which is why I don't think the reconcilers are going to be around for long. But, you know, that's my prediction. I don't know if, you know, you see it that way, but yeah, we've been going actually. Wow. Time flies when I'm talking with you. It's been like an hour. I really appreciate you talking about this and making it understandable to my audience and hopefully laymen is who I try to make this for. We didn't even get into two kingdom theology. So I'm going to have you back on when you write something about two kingdom theology sometime. But anyway,
if I can just say one more thing. I don't think I mentioned. So when I talk about these reconciler guys, what I want to make clear is I'm not demonizing them.
Right.
I'm not saying this to be kind of, you know, I want to maintain peace. I'm saying this, but I think it's true. And I think most of these guys don't even realize what they're doing, what they're up to, because they're, well, yeah. So I'm not saying they're the bad guys and that we should demonize, that somehow we should kick them from our camp. So I think actually, and I'm not saying they're unintelligent. In fact, I think many of them are very intelligent. I know them, friends with many of them. So I'm not trying to like attack them saying, hey, you guys are actually on orthodox, get out of here. But I do think that they are mistaken, and I think they're self-unaware, or they're unaware of the role they play in our society. And I think if anything, what I'm saying is that we should all, being all of us on a spectrum in the ideology, I really think it's important to think that way. We should all seek to become self-aware and then change our postures towards each other and towards the world on account of that self-awareness. I think put that out there.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad, especially after my last comment, which I agree with what you just said. Yeah, absolutely. They're not necessarily the enemy. But anyway, yeah, where can people find you if they want to? I know you write for Sovereign Nations, but
yeah, I mean, you can find some of my writings on Sovereign Nation. I think the best way is you can Google my name, and then not that I'm very famous or anything, but if you put my name and then do LSU or somewhere or Evangelical or something like that, you'll usually get a list of the things I've written. So if you're interested in all that, I've written on Two Kingdom Theology. Of I'm a fan, Warrior. Which some people think now I'm the reconciler, but we didn't get to that. But yeah.
Nice. So so I look forward to seeing more of your writings, and we'll have to connect again to talk about Two Kingdom Theology sometime. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
God bless. Bye now.